During World War II, snipers played a key role on many battlefields. Hidden amongst the rubble of bombed-out cities and armed with powerful weapons, they could often hold up the advances of entire units.
The role of the sniper has always captivated the public's imagination. The precision of their shots, along with the patience and composure required to hunt their target, elevate these figures to legendary status, admired by both their allies and their enemies. The Eastern Front of World War II, which saw horrific battles between the Soviets and the Germans, had a particular aspect in this regard. In desperation against the Nazi advance, the Red Army decided to allow women to replace the fallen soldiers, and many did so by becoming snipers. They soon proved they had nothing to envy from their male counterparts. Thus, they became heroines to their citizens and nightmares for the invaders.
Snipers had the ability to change the course of history with one shot, one kill.
That's why today, in this new episode of Military History, we will tell you all about the 3 most well-known Soviet snipers of World War II. Before this conflict broke out, the personnel of the Red Army of the Soviet Union were no different from those of other countries of the time. Men were the only ones tasked with fighting on the front lines. Women, if allowed to enlist in the armed forces, served in support roles such as nurses, radio operators, drivers, and administrative staff. If they reached a combat role, it was only as crew members of anti-aircraft weapons, defending their territory from enemy planes. However, in mid-1941, a significant event occurred that would change the mindset of military leaders. On June 22nd, Germany launched a massive invasion of the Soviet Union. This mobilization caught Joseph Stalin off guard, as he had ignored reports from his spies that something was being plotted at the border between the two countries. The Nazis overwhelmed the disorganized Russian defenses, destroying their tanks and planes by the thousands, and killing countless soldiers and civilians. Within a few months, hundreds of kilometers of Soviet territory were under their control, including major cities like Kiev and Minsk. Other key centers of the Union, such as Leningrad and Moscow, were in imminent danger of falling into their hands. The German offensive lost momentum by late 1941, as winter complicated the advance of their forces. Stalin and his top military leaders took advantage of this moment and considered certain measures to prevent their collapse. One of these measures was the redirection of industrial resources to support the war effort and the relocation of factories to the interior of the country to prevent them from falling into Nazi hands. To sabotage the invaders' actions, partisan groups consisting of civilians and some soldiers were formed to operate behind enemy lines, but something needed to be done to replace the horrifying number of casualties sustained in those months. At the beginning of the German attack, a large number of women sought to join the armed forces to defend the Union, but were turned away. Now, with a clearer understanding of the threat posed by the Nazis, this was reconsidered. As a result, they were trained in various military branches. For example, 3 air regiments were created consisting solely of female personnel. Thus, the Soviet Union became the first country to allow women to fly combat missions. One of the most well-known of these groups was the 588th Night Bomber Regiment, nicknamed the Night Witches by their enemies.
И мы знали, что немцы называли нас ночными ведьмами, но мы не возражали. Конечно, мы ночные ведьмы были. Да ясно.
The night witches maneuver through a dangerous situation. The slow and flimsy PO2 lacks protective armor, so the women must strike silently, using stealth tactics and the element of surprise.
When they were close to their aim point, they would switch off their engines and glide in silently to drop the bomb.
Women also took on other roles where they gained fame and prestige, such as tank crews and infantry divisions. Among these, the most celebrated combatants of the Red Army emerged from infantry divisions. In addition to those who fought on the front lines, a highly sought-after position was that of sniper. Partly this was because, generally, their smaller bodies made them harder for the enemy to detect. This size advantage also meant they required less food during the hours or even days they had to remain in the same position, waiting for their prey. One of the most famous of these skilled combatants was Nina Lobkovskaya. Born in 1924 in what is now Kazakhstan, she was 17 years old when, in 1942, her father was called to join the Red Army. Soon after, she received the terrible news that he had been killed in action. Eager to avenge him and defend her country, she enlisted as a sniper later that year. By then, the German advance had significantly slowed, mainly due to the Battle of Stalingrad. The Soviets could afford to train their new recruits before sending them to the front lines. Nina underwent a rigorous course where she trained for her role, learning to dig and move between trenches, camouflage herself with her surroundings, and shoot moving targets. By mid-1943, she had successfully graduated and was sent to the conflict. She initially fought on the Kalinin front, where the Russians had been facing off against the Nazis since the beginning of Operation Barbarossa, who aimed to reach Moscow. It was here that she killed her first enemy. Later, she was tasked with training other snipers, and after fulfilling this mission, she was transferred to divisions fighting near the Baltic states. It was on this front where, according to her own account, she faced her worst battles. Although by this point the Germans were being slowly driven out of Soviet territory, they still maintained a significant presence in the north. The fighting against the invaders there was bloody and exhausting, with waves of enemies that seemed endless. On one occasion, Lobkovskaya had to set aside her sniper rifle and pick up a flamethrower to halt a Nazi attack. Despite the large number of casualties, the Soviet line held firm, and they managed to repel the Germans. By 1944, Nina was already a platoon commander. Despite sustaining several injuries during the fighting, she was part of the armies that drove the Germans out of the Baltic region, Belarus, and Poland. She was even present at the impressive liberation of Warsaw in December of that year, after which she and her comrades traveled 400 kilometers in 2 weeks, chasing the Germans.
Naturally, it's too soon to receive Russian newsreels of the new offensive. Moreover, when the Red Army broke through in the south, it moved at such a pace that progress must be reported hourly to be up to date. The advance towards Silesia at an early stage covered about 100 miles in 3 days. Then came the news of the outflanking breakthrough north and south of the Polish capital and its liberation.
In 1945, the last year of the war, she held the rank of lieutenant and was the leader of a sniper company that saw combat near the German-Polish border. The only reason Nina did not make it to Berlin was because her division was ordered to be withdrawn from the front, and they were instead given support roles. After the war, she turned to history, graduating from Moscow University. Her life from this time on is shrouded in mystery. No one knows the date of her death, for example. Also, as she was not a figure raised by propaganda like other cases we will see later, the exact number of confirmed casualties is also unknown. However, the high number of personal medals received leaves no doubt that she was a top-level fighter. She was awarded the Medal for Combat Service, the Medal of Valor, the Order of Glory, 3rd Class, the Order of the Patriotic War, 2nd Class and 2 1st-class orders, and the Order of the Red Banner. Another famous Soviet sniper was Roza Shanina. She was born in 1924 in the small Russian village of Häyhä. During 1941 and 1942, while studying at university, 3 of her brothers were killed in combat against the Germans. After this, Shanina did not hesitate for a second to enlist in the Red Army. While waiting for her application to be accepted, she began training with a rifle. She was eventually allowed to join the Central School of Female Sniper Training, from which she graduated with honors. Despite being under 20 years old, she was even offered a position as an instructor. However, Shanina wanted to go to the front lines. She would get her chance in early 1944, where she was immediately chosen as the commander of a sniper platoon. 3 days later, she took out her first enemy. Just 2 weeks after arriving at the front lines, she received her first medal for her actions in the Smolensk province. These included killing 13 enemies while artillery exploded around her, and she was subjected to machine gun fire. It didn't take long for Soviet propaganda to start using her image to inspire both soldiers and civilians alike. We can now hear some of the feats accomplished by Shanina.
During one engagement, around 50 Germans got into the trench containing Shanina and 11 female snipers. The fighting was hand-to-hand, with rifles, bayonets, grenades and shovels all used. The snipers won, even taking a few prisoners. She and her unit were heavily involved in the battle for Vilnius. During intense daily operations, Shanina disposed of a German sniper, outwitting him and other opponents with great fieldcraft and skill.
During the liberation of previously conquered territory, snipers were often granted permission to withdraw from the front or even ordered to stay behind. This was the case for Shanina during Operation Bagration in June 1944, which aimed to drive the Germans out of Belarus. But the young woman flatly refused to stay out of the fight. Disobeying her superiors and risking a court-martial, she grabbed her rifle and headed into combat. This happened more than once, even going so far as to write to Joseph Stalin on 2 separate occasions to request permission. Although she was reprimanded for her defiance, the punishment was not severe, as the army needed her effectiveness. The Soviet forces continued advancing throughout that year, reaching East Prussia. By December, Shanina had already accumulated over 50 confirmed kills and numerous medals, but it was here that she would see her final combat. By January 1945, the Germans had significantly reinforced their defenses, and the fighting between the 2 sides was fierce. Despite Soviet efforts, the enemy held out and even counterattacked. By the end of the month, of the 78 soldiers in Shanina's platoon, 72 had been killed. She herself wrote in her personal diary that she felt her end was near. On January 27th, a brutal artillery assault struck the sniper's position. According to witnesses, one of her comrades had been injured, and while the young woman was protecting his body, a shell fragment hit her chest. She was quickly rushed to a hospital, but despite the medical staff's efforts to save her, she succumbed the following day. Posthumously, Shanina was honored as a heroine, with streets and museums named after her. Although she was always lauded by the press, she remained constantly humble. In her diary, she wrote, "What have I really done? No more than what I should as a Soviet, having risen to defend the homeland." At the time of her death, Roza Shanina was a senior sergeant and had been awarded 2 Orders of Glory and a Medal for Valor. She is credited with 59 kills. The last case we'll discuss in this video, and perhaps the most well-known, is that of Lyudmila Pavlichenko. Born in 1926 in Ukraine, she had already begun practicing marksmanship in her teens. As a university student, she had also taken sniper courses. However, Lyudmila's intention was not to join the armed forces. She wanted to be a history teacher. At 25, just before finishing her degree, the German invasion began. She did not hesitate and immediately went to the Soviet recruitment offices. The recruiters refused to accept her, and when she persisted, they offered her a position as a nurse. But when she showed all her marksmanship training, they agreed to take her on as a sniper. However, she had to wait for her opportunity to showcase her skills. Due to a shortage of equipment, she was assigned to dig trenches in the Ukrainian province of Odessa, with only a hand grenade as her weapon. Her luck changed in August 1941, when an injured comrade gave her his Mosin Nagant rifle. There, her legend began, as she killed 2 German officers in one day at a distance of 400 meters. Odessa was besieged primarily by Romanian forces, one of the Nazi allies, although elements of the German army also assisted them. The confrontation lasted nearly 2.5 months. During this time, Lyudmila was constantly engaged in battles against the enemy. Due to her skill and composure in carrying out her mission, she was quickly promoted to sergeant. Despite her efforts, those of her comrades, and those of the civilian population, by October, the Axis forces had the Soviets cornered. By the time they were forced to abandon the province, Lyudmila had 187 confirmed kills. But her legend did not end there. After the fall of Odessa, her division was transported to Sevastopol. This city was the only part of the Crimean Peninsula still not in Axis hands. After a bloody battle that did not achieve the desired results, the Germans and their allies once again resorted to a siege. This time it was much more prolonged, lasting 8 long and grueling months. But while Soviet defenses slowly fell and supplies dwindled, Lyudmila continued with her mission. More than 100 enemies were added to her extensive list of victims during this time. Thanks to her excellent performance, she was also put in charge of training new snipers who joined her in leading the Nazis to their deaths. During this period, she not only made a name for herself among her allies, but also with her enemies.
German intelligence learned who she was. They even made radio broadcasts offering her money, rank, and favored treatment if she defected, as tens of thousands of Ukrainians already had. Lyudmila Pavlichenko was wounded 4 times by shrapnel and once by a machine gun bullet. But she never wavered, and after each wounding and recovery, she returned and continued doing her job.
During her time in Sevastopol, Lyudmila met the young Alexei Kitsenko, who shared her role in the Red Army. Shortly afterward, they married. However, this rare moment of happiness on the battlefield was cruelly brief. Just a few weeks later, Alexei was wounded by a mortar shell and died a few days later in the field hospital. Lyudmila had no time to mourn his death, as the Germans continued advancing. The invaders realized that a Soviet sniper was taking them out one by one, so they resorted to their own snipers to find her. According to sources, in one particularly long duel, Lyudmila and her rival pursued each other for 3 entire days, until she finally delivered the fatal shot. But unfortunately, her luck ran out. In June 1942, just days before Sevastopol fell, shrapnel from a mortar wounded her in the face. By then, the Soviet propaganda department had already heard of her legend, so the High Command ordered her evacuation from the city. They recognized her value as a symbol of Red Army courage and did not want her life to be at risk. She was even dubbed Lady Death. Lyudmila recovered from her injuries but did not return to the front. Instead, she was promoted to lieutenant and sent to countries like Canada and the United States on publicity tours. Her goal was to persuade Western allies to open a second front against Germany. She even became the first Soviet person to stay in the White House as a guest of President Roosevelt. Below, we can hear part of the inspiring speech she gave on American soil.
Я хочу сказать вам, что мы победим, что нет такой силы, которая могла бы помешать победоносному маршу свободных народов мира. Мы должны объединиться. Как русский солдат, я предлагаю вам, великим солдатам Америки, свою руку. Fellow soldiers, forward to victory.
After her tour, she continued training snipers until the end of the war. Lyudmila Pavlichenko is credited with 309 kills, of which 36 were enemy snipers. Some sources suggest that the actual number of her kills might have been higher, as a third party is needed to officially confirm each death. Others claim that her legend is an exaggeration by Soviet propaganda and that she may not have performed many of the feats attributed to her. This last point might have some truth, as all countries engaged in such practices. Nonetheless, it cannot be denied that regardless of the true number of kills, Lyudmila was one of the most successful snipers of World War II. In addition to numerous campaign medals, she was awarded 2 combat service medals, 2 Orders of Lenin, and the honorary title of Hero of the Soviet Union. The 3 women we discussed are perhaps the most well-known, but they are far from the only ones. It is believed that around 2,500 women enlisted as snipers during World War II. Collectively, their credited kills exceed 11,000. However, most of them did not return home. Approximately only 1/5 survived until the fall of Nazism. Their impact, both on the battlefield and on the morale of the Red Army and the Soviet people, cannot be overlooked. The Winter War is a lesser-known conflict between Finland and the Soviet Union. It was a confrontation that occurred just a few months after the beginning of World War II. While everyone, including the combatants, expected a quick Russian victory, the Finnish defenders surprised the world by bravely resisting against terrible odds. One of these unexpected heroes was a shy farmer who, despite facing the coldest winter in Finland's history, wreaked havoc on enemy ranks. Armed with only an outdated rifle, he caused the highest number of casualties recorded by a single man throughout World War II. Today, in this new episode of Military History, we'll tell you all about Simo Häyhä, also known as the White Death. Simo Häyhä was born on December 17, 1905 in the municipality of Rautjärvi, located in southern Finland. Surprisingly for a man who would sow terror in thousands of men, he had a normal and peaceful childhood on his family farm. He was a shy boy, with no grand dreams other than helping his father and brothers with daily work. To ensure food, he learned to hunt and survive in the dense forests of his country. His skill with the rifle was already evident at that time, as every shooting competition he participated in ended with his victory. According to his family's later accounts, the house was filled with trophies. You can hear his granddaughters talking about those moments before his fame.
Nehän piti puhastaa ne aseet, se oli tuvassa, hänellä oli se ase aina ja sitä rassattiin ja puhastettiin ja siikattiin. Mutta ei meitä pelottanut se, vaikka hän oli niin hyvä aseen hallitsija, että ei tarvinnut pelätä.
Palkinnot oli silloin niin pieniä, semmoisia kahvilusikoita ja ei niistä siihen aikaan mitään sen kummempaa numeroa tehty. Minä en ollenkaan tiennyt, että hän oli niin hyvä ampuja kuin hän sitten loppujen lopuksi oli.
At 17, he joined the Civil Guard, a volunteer militia. At 19, he began his mandatory military service, lasting 15 months. Even during this time, his superiors could witness his skill with the rifle. According to his future biographer, Simo was able to hit the target 16 times in less than a minute at a distance of 150 meters with a bolt-action rifle without a telescopic sight. After completing his military service, he brought home 2 rewards, the rank of corporal and the weapon with which he impressed his comrades, a Finnish variant of the Soviet Mosin Nagant. But if he thought a quiet life awaited him on his farm, he was gravely mistaken. A neighboring country was casting hungry eyes upon Simo's nation. Before recounting his exploits, we must delve into a bit of history. Finland was for a long time the eastern region of the Kingdom of Norway. After the Finnish War of 1808, the Russian Empire annexed these territories, naming them the Grand Duchy of Finland. This arrangement persisted for over a century, although relations between the two peoples were never entirely warm. The natives always sought autonomy, rejecting the Tsar's attempts to integrate them into their empire. However, they had their chance after the Russian Revolution of 1917. Vladimir Lenin, one of its leaders, granted permission to minorities, if they so wished, to declare independence. The Finnish people did not hesitate. This was followed by a brief but bloody civil war that left the conservative and anti-communist party in power. With the opposing faction as their neighbor, in the newly established Soviet Union, tensions between the two territories only escalated. Joseph Stalin, the leader of the USSR since 1922, always made it clear that he desired to reconquer Finnish territory, which he considered rightfully belonging to Russia. In the height of World War II, he would have his chance. In the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact, a secret treaty signed with Nazi Germany, Hitler and Stalin divided Eastern Europe between them. This is how Finland ended up on the Soviet side. Without hesitation, Stalin began his propaganda campaign. According to it, the Finnish government was violently anti-communist and represented a danger to Soviet Bolsheviks. Additionally, Leningrad, one of the most important Russian cities, was only 30 kilometers from the border separating the two countries, making it at risk of attack. The Finns knew that if negotiations were not entered into, they would be invaded. In these meetings, the Soviet Union demanded territory, as well as the opportunity to establish military bases there. The Finnish government repeatedly rejected these demands, as they did not believe Stalin would settle for just this. After a month of failed encounters, the dictator gave the order. On November 30th, 1939, Soviet troops invaded Finland, marking the beginning of the Winter War. This is how the onset of this conflict was recounted at the time. The superiority of the Red Army was immense. They outnumbered their enemies by far in men, armored vehicles, planes, and artillery pieces. Everyone thought that the Russian giant would quickly crush its small neighbor, but they would be surprised by the locals' resilience. It was in this contest that the legend of Simo Häyhä was born. As tensions between the two countries escalated, Simo re-enlisted in the army. Just a year before the war began, as he saw international relations deteriorating, he began training as a sniper. His first encounter with the Soviet enemy was in the Battle of Kola, which began in December 1939. Dressed completely in white, he blended perfectly into the snowdrifts accumulating on the ground. The Russian leaders, on the other hand, were so confident in a quick victory that they didn't provide their soldiers with winter clothing. Their dark uniforms stood out. According to the records kept by his comrades, in the first 22 days, Simo had 138 confirmed kills to his name. The invaders would hear the shot, see one of their comrades fall, but couldn't find the shooter. When they panicked, they forgot their training and became easy prey for the skilled marksman. It didn't take long for this lone man to become a terror in the Soviet ranks. He even earned a fearsome nickname, the White Death. For Simo Häyhä, killing the enemy wasn't much different from hunting animals in his hometown. He would wake up before sunrise and head to a previously chosen position. From there, he would be invisible to Russian eyes, while he could see everything. He poured water under the barrel of his rifle so it would freeze and avoid puffs of snow every time he fired. He put snow in his mouth so his breath wouldn't condense in the air and alert enemy snipers. All of this with the rifle he had won years before, which had already become obsolete. He didn't even use a telescopic sight, as the glint of it in the sunlight could give away his position to the Russians. Moreover, his short stature, 1.60 m, made him a small target for the other side. Listen to the same White Death giving his testimony about how he differed from the rival snipers.
Se oli ne sensit, että heillä on kiikarit, ja me veikkaan, että ne ei ole vienyt ihan tarkalleen tarkkuuteen. Ne vei aina vähän vasemmalle.
Jaa.
Ja toinen juttu on siinä, että niissä oli kiikari, se kiikari nähdään, niin siinä pysyt tuovet ylempään. Niihin pitää aina nostaa se nuppi aina ylempäksi kuin mitä meikäläinen. Meikäläiset nuppii tuon pystyyn vähän siellä lumeen pienessä koterossa. Sitä ei oikeastaan, paljon silmät ei kyllä erottanutkaan yhteen.
But this wasn't the only way Simo fought. He also led a small squad on outings, where he engaged the Soviets in close combat. The deaths he caused in this manner, with a submachine gun instead of his rifle, were not counted. The Battle of Kola lasted until the end of the Winter War. Despite the Soviets throwing tens of thousands of men against the defenders, they couldn't overwhelm them. The invaders could only advance along the roads, as they lacked equipment to cross the snowy fields. In contrast, the Finns had been trained to move on skis. This, coupled with local defensive fortifications, incredibly impeded the Russian advance. At a point dubbed the Hill of Death, the Soviets attacked with an entire regiment, 32 Finns. Only 4 defenders survived, but by the time the enemy retreated, they had lost 400 men. Stalin was furious with his generals. They had promised him a swift victory, but his troops were being battered by what seemed like a handful of guerrillas. The public opinion of the vast majority of the world was with the Finns, while the Red Army was seen as a disgrace. The reasons for this resounding failure are many. As mentioned earlier, Soviet military leaders were confident they could defeat the defenders before the weather worsened. Therefore, the soldiers were not prepared to face the terrible Finnish cold. The winter, which had been Russia's ally, having defeated Napoleon in the past and would defeat Hitler in the future, was now favoring the other side. In addition to this, the Great Purge carried out by Stalin's orders in the second half of the 1930s had imprisoned or killed a large number of veteran officers and soldiers. Now, only the most obedient or loyal to their leader remained, but not the most capable. They couldn't counter the guerrilla tactics adopted by the Finns, which virtually nullified the Soviet numerical superiority. Also, for many, it was important for soldiers to know each other, as they were from nearby communities. These bonds made them fight with greater bravery, as recounted by a historian below.
Talvisodan henki, sen perustekijöinä oli kyllä se, että talvisotaan koottiin miehet samoista suojeluskuntapiireistä, siis käytännössä katsoen niin yhden kylän miehistä muodostettiin komppania tai tykistöpatteria. Siellä oli sitten nimismies, saattoi olla komppanian päällikkönä, apteekkari, joukkuejohtajana ja sillä tavalla miehet oli naapureita ja tuttuja keskenään. Ja se sitkeys, millä taisteltiin ihan viimeiseen mieheen, niin mun nähdäkseni johtui ennen kaikkea siitä, että miehet olivat siellä rintamalla kovissa olosuhteissa niin yhdessä puolustamassa niitä kotisuomessa olevia perheitä.
Meanwhile, Simo continued with his exploits. Local propaganda, upon hearing about him, began to magnify his image until he became a heroic figure. They didn't need to exaggerate his numbers. According to his own records, he already had around 500 confirmed kills, only counting those from his sniper rifle. On December 21st, he had his highest number of daily casualties, with 25 deaths in one day. The press dubbed this feat Häyhä's gift to the Finnish people. But Stalin's patience was running out. By the beginning of 1940, the Russians increased their offensive. General Kliment Voroshilov, in charge of the forces on the front, was replaced by Semyon Timoshenko. Before accepting, he made it a condition that he couldn't be blamed for the number of Soviet deaths in the upcoming attacks. The Russian leader approved his request. Timoshenko changed the tactics adopted by his predecessor. He would make the most of their numerical superiority, regardless of the cost of life. The Finns were subjected to endless artillery bombardments, followed by simultaneous attacks at different points on the front. No matter how many invaders they killed, there were always more. The Finns needed to rest their soldiers, but the Soviets simply rotated them. While some recovered, others continued the attack. This was how, in a short time, the locals were forced to retreat, relinquishing much of the ground they had held for so long. Anyway, the Finns made every kilometer of land gained by the enemy very costly. Moreover, the White Death continued to be a deadly thorn. They brought Russian snipers to the front to finish off the sniper, but they all fell without exception. However, his luck eventually ran out. On March 6, 1940, a soldier from the Red Army hit Simo with an explosive bullet in the jaw. It shattered the lower part of his face, almost tearing off his left cheek. His wound was so severe that when he was found after the battle, his comrades thought he was dead. He was placed on the pile of Finnish corpses and taken away from the front. Only when an officer ordered his body to be searched for to pay him his deserved honors did they discover that he was still moving. For a week, Simo remained in a coma. He woke up on March 13, 1940, the same day Finland and the Soviet Union signed peace. Rumors of his death had already spread throughout the country. He even saw an advertisement declaring his death in a local newspaper. But he wrote to them himself to correct the error. You can hear him talking about what he felt when he was wounded.
Kun minä sain nassuja ja menin tuuskalle siihen, mitään ei kyllä, vaikka minun äiti pelasi vielä, mutta mitään ei kyennyt liikuttamaan yhtään, ei yhtään minkään vertaa. Ensin hän meillä siis panna minut selälle askioon.
Nee.
Eihän siinä selälle olisi monta minuuttia, oliko siinä olisi hukkunut.
Nee, kyllä.
Mutta sitten kun tuo käännyi mahalle, niin siinä näysi. Ei mitään niille tuonne, ei mennyt tuonne keuhkoon. Mitä niistä tuli valuu alas lattialle.
Nee.
Ja lattioon.
Nee.
The tactics employed by Timoshenko had worked, and when the Soviets offered the Finns the terms of surrender, they had no choice but to negotiate. The treaty that ended the Winter War was a bitter pill for the invaded. They were forced to concede more territory than demanded by the negotiations prior to the start of the conflict. Much of this land was industrialized, so those benefits went to serve the invaders. They also had to allow the establishment of military bases on the Hanko Peninsula, but the staunch defense of the Finnish army thwarted Stalin's plans to annex all of their territory. While this conflict is counted as a Soviet victory, it cannot be denied that the heroic actions of the locals served to maintain their autonomy, while the Red Army and Stalin saw their reputation tarnished. After the cessation of hostilities, Simo had to tend to his wounds. It took him 26 reconstructive surgeries over 14 months. Although the scar obtained was permanent, he was able to fully recover. Already in good health, he was promoted from his rank of corporal to second lieutenant, something unique in the country's history. On June 22, 1941, Germany invaded the Soviet Union. Taking advantage of this situation, 3 days later, Finland began the continuation war against Russia, seeking to reclaim lost territory. Simo Häyhä wanted to rejoin the troops, but he was excused based on his combat injuries. Instead, he was decorated with 2 medals of freedom, an honorary rifle, and a farm in the village of Valakjärvi. There he spent most of the rest of his life, working the land. He also devoted himself to hunting and breeding dogs. His scar, which made him easily recognizable, and his shy personality, caused him to retreat more and more into his home. The battles also had a cost, as nightmares were a recurring thing in his nights. Although he spent a lot of time in solitude, he maintained relationships with his family and friends from the army. Despite his achievements, he was always very modest. He once stated, "I did what I was ordered to do the best I could." When farm work became too difficult for him due to his advanced age, he moved to a small apartment, and in the twilight of his days, to a veteran's home. He died on April 1, 2002, at the age of 96, surrounded by his loved ones. Now, let's listen to his family and friends remembering him.
Me annettiin hänelle juhlallinen, niin kuin vähän sotilas. Me reserviläiset se järjestettiin.
Minä muistan Simo sitä, oli tässä jossain mainittu tällaisen, kun he läksi niin kuin hyökkäykseen, niin sanoi, että tämä on meidän maata ja sitä täytyy puolustaa.
Simo Häyhä is considered the deadliest sniper, not only of World War II, but of history. According to his own records, he had 504 confirmed kills. These only count the deaths with his Mosin Nagant that he personally witnessed, and do not include those caused by his submachine gun or shots that he wasn't sure were fatal, so others estimate around 700 deaths to his name. While there is a possibility that some of these numbers may have been exaggerated by Finnish propaganda, there is no doubt about this man's accuracy. His actions during the Winter War inspired allies and terrified enemies alike, and in his country, he is remembered as a national hero. Stalingrad, 1942. Winter lashed the city, covering the ruins in a blanket of white and gray. Amid the rubble, the great Soviet sniper hunted down his enemies, one by one. Vasili Zaitsev, an emblem of the Red Army who annihilated 400 Nazis during World War II. Such was his impact on the conflict that Adolf Hitler sent his best marksman to assassinate him. If you want to learn everything about the life of Vasili Zaitsev, his legacy, and the incredible confrontation with the Nazi sniper, then join us for this new installment of military history. The journey of this war hero begins in a village located in the Ural Mountains, in a remote region of the Soviet Union. His family was peasant and descended from Cossacks, an ethnic group known for their prowess in combat, horsemanship, and military discipline. From a very young age, he grew up in an environment where hunting was not just a hobby, but a necessity for subsistence. They depended on animal meat for food and their fur for the freezing winters. However, in this little boy's case, it was also shaping his future. Zaitsev learned to shoot at age 12, guided by his grandfather, who taught him the basics of patience, observation, and precision, essential values for a sniper. One of the first challenges he faced as a hunter was learning not to waste ammunition, since bullets were scarce and expensive at home. Instead of indiscriminately pulling the trigger, his mentor instilled in him the importance of waiting for the perfect moment, analyzing the wind, the distance, and the movement of the prey. What that boy never imagined was that all those words would echo in his head decades later, but his targets wouldn't be wild animals.
Now, Vasili! Fire! Fire, Vasili!
During those early years, Vasili Zaitsev amazed his entire family with his talent with a rifle. However, the boy soon grew up, and the course of his life led him away from weapons. In 1930, he graduated from technical school and began working in construction. He spent a long time there until 1937, when the turbulent European landscape, with the threat of Adolf Hitler on the horizon, led him to join the army. In any case, his military career began far from weapons. He took advantage of his strength to continue studying and became an accountant, and was assigned to the Pacific Fleet to perform administrative duties within the Navy. However, his love for weapons never faded. Despite his position in the rear, he spent a lot of time practicing shooting and participating in precision competitions at the naval base. Thanks to his exceptional marksmanship, he caught the attention of his superiors. And in June 1941, everything changed. Nazi Germany betrayed the non-aggression pact with the Soviet Union and launched Operation Barbarossa. Hearing about the massacres his comrades were suffering, Zaitsev, like many other Soviet soldiers, felt the need to join the active struggle. That's why in September 1942, he requested a transfer to the front. He was assigned to the 62nd Army, commanded by General Vasily Chukov, which was defending Stalingrad against the German offensive. One of the fiercest battles of the Nazi-Soviet confrontation awaited him, and the brutality of war soon welcomed him. After an ordeal crossing the Volga River, he finally reached the city, where he was initially assigned as an infantryman with a standard Mosin Nagant rifle. However, he soon demonstrated his lethal skills in combat. In one of his first engagements, he camouflaged himself among the corpses the Germans had piled up on the battlefield and waited for his moment. When he began to hear the roar of shelling in the area, he knew it was time to take action. The loud explosions would serve to mask his weapon's fire as he picked off the enemy one by one. Zaitsev was lethal and didn't miss a single shot. His superiors, fascinated by his performance, gave him a Mosin Nagant M9130 rifle with a telescopic sight and officially assigned him as a sniper for the 284th Rifle Regiment. Once in that role, he began operating in the ruins of Stalingrad, quickly becoming a true German hunter. His tactics consisted of constant movement, hiding in the rubble, and using the environment to his advantage. He was a lethal ghost. His exploits soon made him famous, and to continue contributing to the Red Army, he also began training new snipers. Among his best students were Viktor Medvedev, Anatoly Chekhov, and Tanya Chernova. All three spread terror among the Nazis, who began to fear raising their heads in trenches and ruins because they would die instantly. With his trusted team, Vasili Zaitsev made his most important contribution from a strategic point of view. Snipers stopped acting alone and began operating in groups of 2 or 3. With an observer and a secondary sniper, they constantly rotated positions to avoid detection. Every detail made a difference. Between October and December 1942, Zaitsev had 242 confirmed kills among German soldiers and officers. However, the actual number of casualties could have been much higher, as several of his murders went unrecorded. It is estimated that the figure could be as high as 400 enemies killed by his rifle, the deadly Mosin Nagant used by talent and the means to be a killing machine. But his enormous fame only made him a key target for his enemy. Thus, the hunter would become the hunted. The story of an epic duel began when Soviet soldiers captured a German soldier. After undergoing a brutal interrogation, the Nazi admitted that Wehrmacht commanders were seriously concerned about the damage Zaitsev had inflicted. Because of this concern, they had decided to send a man with the sole purpose of killing the Big Rabbit, since the sniper's surname translates as Rabbit. But who was in charge of eliminating him?
I would never have guessed what kind of big shot had flown to Stalingrad. But when we dragged him out, we found he'd been the head of a Berlin sniper school.
His name was Erwin Koenig, and he was the director of the SS sniper school in Zasen. In his memoirs, the Soviet soldier refers to the tension he experienced at the time. While his superiors were confident he would achieve victory, his mind was filled with doubts. Would he be able to hunt down his nemesis? Or would he be shot dead by a Nazi bullet? The news worried me. Koenig had to be a cunning fox. The Germans weren't exactly amateurs, and besides, to become director of the sniper school, he had to have successfully competed against the best in the Wehrmacht, he recalled in his book. That fear soon proved more justified. In a single day, the Nazi managed to kill 2 of Zaitsev's best and most experienced men. Thus, he demonstrated to the Soviets that he would be facing a well-trained and skilled soldier. He would be a difficult target to take down, but not impossible. As a first step, Vasili summoned another of his apprentices, Nikolai Kulikov. Together, they headed to the area where the Nazi had defeated his 2 comrades, and there, the enemy welcomed them in its own way. After hours of silence and without moving a muscle, a helmet suddenly appeared, moving slowly along the enemy trench. It was a temptation, but it was also a trap. Zaitsev noticed that the angle and the way it moved were unnatural. It was probably one of Koenig's adjutants using a stick to plant the decoy. If the Soviets fired, they would reveal their position for the German sniper to attack. However, to succeed in this duel, patience was required. Whoever could wait until the right moment and not give in to despair would win. The second day passed in the same way. No one showed up, and the tension continued to rise. If this continued, someone would soon make a mistake. It was on the third day that the scene changed. A Soviet commissar arrived at the trench to inform Zaitsev that he had discovered the enemy's hiding place from the rear. But when he stood up to point it out, a bullet seriously wounded him. Vasili quickly realized that only an elite sniper was capable of making a shot like that, with such speed and precision. It was Koenig.
Don't do that!
That shot allowed Zaitsev to determine the approximate area from which his enemy was operating. His friend's sacrifice had been worth it. Based on this, he established a series of hiding places. Suddenly, he noticed a pile of stacked bricks covered with a metal sheet. Until then, the place had gone unnoticed, so it was undoubtedly a perfect sniper's nest. To corroborate his premonition, Vasili ordered his comrade to raise a glove tied to a stick above the trench. The enemy bullet immediately arrived. They had found Koenig. It was time to act, but they should not rush. Long hours passed until Zaitsev asked Kulikov to remove his helmet and lift it very slowly. He only had to show a small edge to tempt the Nazi, who once again fell into the trap. The German fired and Vasili's companion sprang to his feet, screaming and feigning collapse. This caused Koenig to poke his head out of hiding, spelling doom. Thus ended the most epic duel between these skilled snipers. Zaitsev and Kulikov later collected the Nazi's body and handed it over as evidence to the High Command. Or at least, this is what the records say. Some theories claim that Erwin Koenig never existed and that it was simply an invention of Nazi propaganda to glorify Vasili. However, others claim that this was the pseudonym of Heinz Thorwald, Nazi commander and director of the Third Reich Sniper School, and that he had adopted another name to avoid being recorded in Soviet records if he was killed. For his part, Zaitsev has personally recalled the most difficult confrontation of his life, seeking to establish the truth behind the events.
All in all, it went on for 3 days. But it ended with victory for us in some 5 seconds. The fascists had come to the duel well prepared. He'd already taken out 2 of my snipers, when with the help of a couple of others, I finally managed to pick him off.
Despite his incredible feats, the war was merciless for the Soviet sniper. In January 1943, shortly before the German surrender at Stalingrad, Zaitsev suffered a serious eye injury from a mortar blast. He was transferred to Moscow, where he received treatment and surgery to save his vision. After recovering, he returned to the front in 1944 and participated in the offensive that advanced across Eastern Europe until the fall of Berlin in May 1945. Although his role during this period was less documented, he continued to fight and train new snipers. For his service in the Battle of Stalingrad and throughout World War II, he received multiple decorations, including the USSR's highest honor, Hero of the Soviet Union. He also earned the Order of Lenin, the Medal of Valor, and the Order of the Red Banner. After the war, he retired from the army and settled in Kyiv, where he worked as a textile engineer. For the rest of his life, he remained in contact with his former comrades and continued to share his experiences with new generations of soldiers. He died on December 15, 1991, just days before the dissolution of the Soviet Union. In 2006, his remains were transferred to Volgograd, formerly Stalingrad, to be buried alongside his comrades at Mamayev Kurgan, the site of the great battle in which he became a legend. Thus, we come to the end of our video. If you want to continue learning about the most incredible events and epic confrontations, we'll see you in the next installment of Military History.